Hey, Dr. Salem.
Hey, great to see you, Dr. Amos. How you doing?
I am doing fantastic.
I see you got a special hat today. I gotta know a little more about it here.
Yeah, well, I'm too frugal to buy my own hats most of the time, so I just get whatever someone gives me. And this was given to me at PCRS, so I was like, you know what, I gotta bring it out for tonight.
I like it. I like it.
So I mean, we got the sperm on there. It's actually funny. The other day, that's actually a really funny thing. So a patient says to me, I had a hat on that was like a white one, and had a little sperm on it, and the patient said to me, "Oh, you got sperm on your hat," and I took it literal that there was sperm on my hat because I just came from andrology. And I thought and I go, excuse me, on my hat? And she's like, oh no, little drawings. I go, oh, I have drawings on my hat of sperm. Yes, I do. I was like, oh my God, only in our field would you think that is actually even possible. So
There's a few perils in our field, and it's one of the funny ones that I usually get from patients during transfers is, has anybody ever peed on you? And I say, you know what? It's happened before, and you wouldn't be the last one, so don't worry about it.
I've never had anyone pee on me in our field yet, so that's never happened to me.
All right, okay. Well, you're lucky. You're luckier than I am, or something.
Yeah, I don't know why I'm so lucky, but like I said, when I was at Mayo, I had someone pee on me. There was a little lady I remember, and she I told her to cough, and she said, if I cough, I'm gonna pee. And I said, no, it's okay, you're not gonna pee. She peed. Yeah, she peed a lot. Yeah, and so I came out all soaking wet, and everyone was just looking at me. I'm like, yep, I got peed on.
Yep, your workplace hazards. It's okay though, not a problem. But I know we're talking about some other things that are questionable hazards or questionable things that we're seeing a lot in the news these days in the media, and something we wanted to talk about. So
yeah. There's I actually about a week ago did a podcast topic on this, about this idea. I get this asked all the time. Am I discarding abnormal embryos? And the thing is, if you go back to like 2014, 2015, I forgot which clinic I was with. It was like Retcher or some of his name was, a Breacher. That guy came out and basically said, hey, I put back, so many embryos that were abnormal, and all these live births came from it. And I mean, that really did wake people up. It made people go, what's going on here? And so the question is, how is that possible? How can you put back abnormal embryos and get a live birth from it? I know you used to work with the great doctor at USC who, I would say wasn't originally a big fan of PGT. I know a lot of doctors are coming around, and actually I think those doctors kind of set the path forward for us to understand that PGT is in everything, and that we had to take a step back and go, we're missing things here, such as mosaic embryos. And that's really where what I talked about in the podcast is this idea that the embryos were actually never abnormal, that they were actually mosaic or something like that. And so with your history being at USC, I'd love to hear what you were trained on, and going through that time.
It's true, Dr. Paulson, and he, really kind of the torchbearer, I would say, for professors, academics who really thought very I mean, he was very, very thoughtful in his approach to thinking about this. And I would say that his preeminent voice would that lingers with me, is this idea of if you get to a position where you want to make absolutely certain that you never, ever, ever throw away one embryo that could have led to a baby, wouldn't you just transfer every single embryo? And it's a good question. I mean, the other part of that coin, or the other side of that coin, is that always the right question? But he had a point, and he had this point of if you only have one embryo and it's the last embryo you'll ever have, should you just transfer it? And that's what we're going to talk about tonight. I think that's a big part of our conversation.
Yeah, and his point is not wrong. I mean, if you have 3 embryos, it doesn't matter whether you do PGT or not. If you're going to put them all back eventually, in the end, right? Your chance of getting pregnant are going to be the same. Now, I actually have a little bit of a different opinion on this, but I'll get into that a little bit later. I think the first part, because I don't want to confuse people, is this idea that if the normal embryo is there, then they're going to get pregnant eventually, right? So it's in there. All you're doing is getting to it faster by testing it. And so for people who don't know, I mean, I remember when I first started, I think it was even like residency. This is when, they were doing, I think at that time they were calling it PGS at that time. And it was, through usually like fish technology and stuff like that. And what was happening is that, people were getting lower pregnancy rates with doing it. And so ASN came out and said, hey, everyone, stop doing this.
Yeah.
You're getting lower pregnancy rates. It's not working. And it wasn't that it wasn't working. It was the fact that the testing we were doing wasn't working. It was incorrect. And so we were absolutely throwing away abnormal embryos. And then came, arrays that came out with SNP technology and CGH arrays. And at that point, now all of a sudden things were a little bit clearer.
Yeah.
And that's, no one wanted to call it PGS anymore because that was told not to do. So they said, okay, let's call it CCS. And then later, obviously, it got called PGT. But we didn't really talk about mosaics then. It wasn't really until next-gen sequencing came out that really when mosaics are really a lot easier to see, due to the clarity. And I remember, in the very beginning when Paulson and Richard Scott used to have these discussions about should you do it or should you not, it was always about this idea that you're throwing away, embryos that are normal. But as you know, I mean, there's a study that came out when they looked at when you were intending to treat, when you just said, listen, we're not even going to look at the embryos. We're just going to put them back. And then later we're going to find out if they're normal or not. What was quite interesting is not a single person had a live birth from the true abnormal embryos. Mosaics they did, but not from the true abnormal embryos, where all the cells, at least from the data, looked like they were abnormal. So how do you, I mean, when you talk to patients about this, because I get this a lot, like, am I going to throw away abnormal embryos? And, I tell them, I mean, yes, there's that small possibility that, it's not perfect. You're taking out their cells and assuming the inner cell mass is exactly the same cells, and it does most of the time. But I just wonder, what do you tell patients who are afraid of that?
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree with you. I mean, I think this is, this is one of many questions that we should ask ourselves when we're doing PGT. Like the first question is there any chance ever that I would ever throw away or, not transfer an embryo because the test called it abnormal when in fact it was normal? And I would say the answer is yes. There's a very, very small chance. And you quote a very important study in the sense that in that study with the big number of people that were enrolled in it, it never happened. So it would take even more people to eventually find one person that, had an abnormal embryo that led to a baby. So that's the first question. I think the second question, though, is, a more practical question, which is if, let's just, for the sake of assuming numbers, let's say 9% of, and these are not the real numbers, but we're just going to assume it just for a thought experiment. Yeah. Let's say 99% of abnormal embryos never implant. And every abnormal embryo that we transfer costs money, is an emotional investment, is a physical investment, can lead to a miscarriage, which can lead to a necessary like DNC, can lead to scar tissue in the uterus. And most importantly, will definitely delay your time to getting the healthy embryo in there and having a baby. So I think one of the really important questions we need to ask ourselves is the practical question, which is, even if there's a very small chance that I'm discarding that one embryo in a whatever, 1 in 100, isn't it also important to think about that time to pregnancy as an important part of this? And that's the thing, is there are many layers of questions that we should ask ourselves. Also, how about, what does a miscarriage mean to you as a couple going through infertility? I can tell you, personally, and for many people I know personally, and for many of my patients, let's not underestimate how impactful a miscarriage is. And I think for a lot of people, if I can tell them, hey, we can lower your miscarriage rate by X amount, I think that's meaningful, So again, there's all these layers of questions that we have to ask ourselves. when we're doing PGT. And for the most part, the test is a very, very good screening test. That's the whole idea. It's a screening test. It tells you among a group of embryos, the ones that are most likely to lead to a pregnancy and a healthy baby. What other questions are you thinking of usually, like when you're thinking about PGT?
Yeah, I also look at it from the standpoint of, you were talking about miscarriages, and there's even some data out there showing just if you keep having failed transfers, that there's this idea that you may just give up, right? This hopelessness that you may develop. And so the faster you get pregnant, the time to pregnancy makes a difference on whether you're going to keep continuing. Yeah. I was really surprised with some of those statistics. Yeah. The other area that I look at, because I actually did an analysis on this, and I wanted to figure out, like, what does the pregnancy rate have to be to make it where it's cost effective for young people, right? And I even used like our numbers and our costs and said, like, can I tell people it's worth doing, even from a cost, even if they just failed one transfer, would it be worth it? And it was pretty tough to find the number that would work. But where I think the greatest value in PGT is for young people, or let's say even people who are not, 38 or older, is it's a normal embryo. And I think that helps you figure out what's wrong faster. Because I don't know how other doctors are, but I'm pretty sure, like, it doesn't work, you go, well, it's probably an abnormal embryo. You can do testing. And, and now you can go, well, we know it wasn't that. So then you can focus a little bit more and go, okay, do we need to look at anything else? Are we missing anything? Do we go and check timing? Do we get worried about other factors that are affecting it? And I think that helps people get pregnant faster, because once you know that they're, normal, you can focus on other factors. I think that's a big part.
That's right. It's reducing that one variable that we'll always ask ourselves, what if? Is it an implantation issue, or is it an embryo issue? And we pretty much eliminate the issue of, hey, this is a genetically normal embryo when we do PGT.
Yeah, absolutely. So when I talk to people about it, they ask me, should I do it? I always tell them that. And in our clinic, I know, it's a little bit more affordable, not always at other places, but there is a point when you get to 38 and above. I mean, even one failed transfer makes it worthwhile. And there's a high chance of a failed transfer. And so, I mean, there is a cost benefit for certain groups. People with miscarriages, multiple miscarriages, going to be a benefit there, even if you're younger. I even think people with unexplained infertility for a long period of time, like I tend to even we'll do ICSI on people if I know they've been trying for over 5 years and we didn't find any reason. I'm just a little bit worried about things. And I think, again, it's helpful. But the thing I would really point out is I've never had the patient really be upset that they did PGT testing. I've had people always wish they did it. And, I've never been anyone go like, oh, I really wish I didn't do it. I feel like I didn't get the benefit. Now, one of the parts I talk to people about is this idea that you can still transfer abnormal embryos, though. Although we don't do it at our clinic, there are clinics out there that will transfer completely abnormal embryos. Yeah. And, again, I don't think it's as scary as people think. I mean, that's the part that most people think is they see these results and then they start thinking, oh my God, I'm making a bunch of abnormal embryos. And I always hear this comment, I barely missed having a baby with Down syndrome. And I'm like, oh, and I have to explain to them, no. Your risk with Down syndrome is still very low. Just because the embryo was there doesn't mean you were going to get pregnant, have a live birth with it. Most likely it would have just, failed or, not implant or something like that. But what's that conversation you have with patients? This idea when they have abnormals, maybe that's all they have is abnormals.
Yeah, that's that conversation comes up, of course, as people get older, as couples get older, and especially, as the woman gets older, we do see a higher rate of, all the embryos being genetically abnormal. And we know that, beyond the age of 45 and beyond, it can be as high as 90% of the embryos are abnormal at that point. But in many ways, I feel like that's all the more reason to at least consider doing the testing, because, you might have to go through multiple retrievals to get to that golden egg, if you will. And I think that's really important. Honestly, this comes up a lot. And when we have a whole batch of embryos that's abnormal, very oftentimes the first impression a lot of our patients have is like, oh my God, I got so unlucky. Like I had 3 embryos tested and all 3 of them are abnormal. And honestly, like where I try to like highlight to them is, hey, listen, if we didn't know these were abnormal, we would be the same place 3, 4, 5, 6 months down the road thinking about doing another retrieval. We've been able to skip all that lost time by just going straight to another retrieval and trying to find that golden egg, if you will, or that, creating that golden embryo. And I think when we reframe it and we really think about, hey, this is actually a very fortunate thing that we were able to avoid all that lost time, that heartache, the cost. People tend to see the positives of saying, well, I did an IVF cycle, it didn't lead to a transfer, but I'm actually happy in a way that I have this information.
Yeah, and your point also, as you made earlier about, even like miscarriages, if you are older and time's not on your side, miscarriages aren't always just a 1 month experience. It could be 4 months, 5 months if you're further along, and that's time lost. I also think anyone who is going to bank embryos, again, another point where what are you banking? You don't know, and so I do think testing is worth it. But the study from 2015 really brought the question of, are we transferring abnormal embryos? And so most people know no one's ever done a study yet to determine if doing testing and not doing testing, if there would be a difference in the cumulative rate. So in other words, like, is PGT hurting the embryos? We don't think so. But again, that study would be very difficult to do because you would have to have people, let's say they had like 10 embryos, they'd have to go through all 10 embryos. And then, they have to do, so it's hard to truly know. Again, in my mind, and I don't know how many, what percentage of people fail after 3 embryos, but it's very small, amount of people after 3. And so the question is that group might benefit because then you could sit there and say, well, they maybe would have quit because after maybe multiple transfers, they finally quit. But again, it would be a really interesting study to do. So that's the question I know a lot of people go is, am I hurting the embryo? On that thought, I have a hard time believing it hurts the embryo. And the reason I have a hard time believing that is because just removing the cells itself won't hurt the embryos. We know this because, you can take a small amount of cells and everything be fine. It actually releases cells on its own. We know embryos split and, things that happen. But I do think there is a point where you can hurt the embryo if you don't know what you're doing or if you take too many cells.
Yeah.
And that has, we do see the difference between embryologists. We do see the difference between clinics and stuff like that. What do you tell people about, like, is it going to hurt the embryo? Because I get this question a lot. How do I know it's not hurting the embryo?
Yeah, so the first thing that we always talk about is very technically, like, where is this biopsy coming from? And like, let's just talk about the specifics. A lot of what we fear is stuff that we don't understand or we don't know. So I think the first step in that direction is saying, hey, look, where does this embryo biopsy come from? And it's coming from the trophectoderm layer of cells. So, when you have an embryo, you have an inner cell mass, and that's what's going to form the baby. And then you have this trophectoderm cell mass, and that's going to, kind of goes all the way around the embryo. And that's what's going to form the placenta. And so the cells that we're actually biopsying, very technically, they're coming from the placenta. We're never taking cells from the baby themselves, right? So that's the first thing that I think is important to recognize. The second thing is, okay, well, if we take cells from the placenta, would that impact the placenta? Does it make, pregnancy more complicated or something? And that's something that I believe we will see in the pregnancy. And thus far, the data has been very reassuring that pregnancies from IVF with PGT don't have a higher set of risk factors than pregnancies from IVF without PGT. So again, it's kind of reassuring there that we're not hurting the pregnancy, which is the downstream impact of it. And then the last thing is, of course, this has been something that's been studied, right? So like when we first started doing blastocyst biopsies, actually blastocyst biopsies, I might be corrected on this. I want to say there's something like 25, 30 nearing 30 years, I believe, were the first blastocyst biopsies when they were experimenting on these. Now, it hasn't been mainstream, of course, until much more recently. But what I'm trying to get at is this idea that we've been studying this for actually quite a while. And it turns out there's a wrong way to do a biopsy, and there's a good way to do a biopsy. And that's why the skill of the embryologist, the equipment they're using, the type of laser that they're using to remove the cells, all these things have to be calibrated in an extremely precise way. And yeah, I mean, if you did it wrong, if you just got Joe Schmo off the street and they started lasering the embryo, you better believe they're going to hurt the embryo. But again, it's the difference between a good surgeon who can go in and very meticulously, cut something out from the body and the patient still does very well, versus somebody who doesn't know what they're doing. And so I do think this is one of those techniques where the skill of the embryologist plays a big role.
Yeah, absolutely. And the nice thing people should feel reassured about is no one is just taking this as everything's safe. I mean, we're doing studies still. I see studies even on techniques of biopsies. We're looking at now potentially using spent media to look at things. So, I mean, everyone's always trying to get to that point of lower risk with the same amount of information. So, got a couple people have questions. And again, if you guys have questions, please, come on the show. You don't have to show your face. You can ask questions. It doesn't even have to be about this topic. We just thought this was an interesting topic because, people worry whether their abdominal embryos will lead to a live birth. So one of the people brought up this question about, I feel like there's guilt that comes with discarding embryos, even if they're abnormal, and said, I'm not sure if others feel this way. And I'm sure there are definitely others that feel that way, but that's an interesting question. It's I think the one nice thing about the prior study that showed abnormal embryos didn't lead to a live birth is at least know that the chance of it becoming a live birth is very, very small. And as you said, I mean, going through those losses, I can't even imagine what that's like. The hopelessness that come from that. So I think, that question is, yeah, I think people do feel guilty discarding them. But it is no different than real life when you just don't get pregnant every month. Sometimes you are having, implantation and it stops right away and you have a chemical miscarriage. It just means you don't have to go through that process versus, getting pregnant and having the miscarriage. What's your thoughts?
No, exactly. I mean, I think it's a point well taken, right? But, one thing that we very rarely talk about, or we certainly don't talk about it enough, is that many people do get pregnant before their first missed period, and they actually don't know they were pregnant because the embryo was genetically abnormal at that point, and it doesn't implant, it doesn't keep growing, et cetera. And so that's effectively the same thing that there are embryos that are being created all the time, but they're never implanting, they're naturally miscarrying, if you will, but they're miscarrying before you even knew you were pregnant. And that probably happens at a rate much higher than we think it does, and so that's certainly one of those things. I think, the other part of this that a lot of people feel conflicted about is, well, couldn't we have given, each embryo a chance to grow? And I hear that. I mean, I think there's a very valid thing to think through there. And I think that's part of why this process is important to, think through and get all the information from your doctor and make sure that you feel comfortable with it. There's some patients that they've told me, they're like, if I ever had, one embryo that was affected by trisomy 21 Down syndrome, and we couldn't transfer it, I would be absolutely devastated. I'd be heartbroken. It goes against my, complete moral compass to do that. And I explained to them exactly what you did, Dr. Amos, which is the vast majority of those embryos will miscarry. It's the rare embryo that would lead to a live birth in that case. And they tell me, yep, thank you, I understand that, but that risk is too high for me. And then I usually talk to them, I say, then maybe PGT is not the right tool for you. Maybe it's not something you want to use and we just need to go down another route. But I think with most people, when we have that conversation, they understand that the natural biology of this is one that already does this selection process. All we're doing is we're kind of doing that selection process in a physically separate compartment, which is the IVF lab.
Yeah, I mentioned them, when it comes to babies, like just Down syndrome, trisomy 21, that it takes about 100 embryos to even get one live birth from that. Things like Turner's, it's close to like 500 to 1,000 to get one live birth. But it's interesting. There's another topic. Like I was always, when I was growing up, I was always for like capital punishment. And then one day I was like, man, if even one person, just one person, even out of 1,000, ended up being put to death who didn't deserve it, it breaks the whole system. I wouldn't feel comfortable with it. So I get that. That makes a lot of sense to me. I think the only difference is that even when that gets a live birth, I mean, there's no guarantee that things will go well. But it's a great question, and it's hard for, I think, a lot of people. But then I go back to that point of you can still transfer it. There are clinics who will transfer it, and I know here locally we have a clinic that will do it. And I've even known people come out of the state to come here just to get abnormal embryos transferred. And so I think that's the good news, is that at least there is an option for people.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I know we have Rachel here, and I know she has a question for us. And so I was going to bring her on. Again, anyone that has any questions, please feel free to come on. We'd love to hear your questions. It does not have to be about this topic. Hi, Rachel.
Hi.
How are you doing?
Good. How are you?
Very good.
Yeah. Thank you guys so much for all the great knowledge. My question is unrelated to this, but I guess maybe similar. So, I was diagnosed with POI a few years ago, and I'm thinking about trying IVF. But in regard, I know that the statistics are low for a live birth and everything like that. But now, just kind of hearing conversations, is IVF worth it in terms of like the side effects with my condition, or should I just not even kind of bother with thinking about it?
Yeah. No, thanks for asking the question. Yeah. Well, yeah. Go ahead, Dr. Amos. Yeah.
Well, I was just going to make sure so everyone knows what POI is, because I don't think that's a common term people hear of. There used to be a thing called POF, and then it got changed to POI. POF used to be premature ovarian failure. Now we call it premature ovarian insufficiency. So just so people understand what that is. The statistics are lower, but I think, like a lot of things, it's a little bit of a grab bag term. I've seen patients who have been called POI, and they're not truly POI. And then I've seen other patients who, are fully into menopause, for 4 years and come into my clinic. And so if you don't mind, Rachel, I just ask you some more questions. Like, is this like a new diagnosis you have? Are you still getting menses?
It's not a new well, it's got it 3 years ago, the diagnosis. And then I've just been doing a bunch of testing now. I got diagnosed with hyperthyroidism a few months ago, and then I went on medication for that. I don't have consistent menses anymore. So now I don't know if I don't know where I kind of am in it, or if it's perimenopausal, because it kind of blends together. So, yeah.
But you do still get menses at times?
Yeah, at times. It's been a few months though, like 2 months so far. Mm-hmm.
And when did it stop being more regular, where you would get it, let's say, every month or every month and a half, into where it's going months without it? How long has that been going on for?
Well, so this is the longest period of time in over a year. It switched about a year ago to every other month that I would have menses. And then I've been trying, I did try an IUI procedure 4 months ago that was successful. And then it wasn't successful in terms of a birth. I at least grew an egg, because I know that you don't respond to medication. Yeah. So it wasn't successful in that. But then I tried 2 other times just to grow an egg, and then they weren't successful. And yeah, so kind of all over the place. Sorry. Yeah.
You might have asked your age as well?
I just turned 34.
Okay. So I wanted to let you know, I'm sorry that you're going through, this. I know it's hard, and my wife also went in kind of like premature ovarian failure at a pretty young age, but not as young as you. It was a little bit later than that. And I've had even one of my nurses actually, same type of situation. But one of the things is, if you're still having periods, that's one of the best signs. So that tells at least there's some functioning system. The fact that you could even do an IUI, was it just with something like Clomid or Femara, or did you have to use injectables?
No, just the Clomid, and then I just did the HCG. I did HCG trigger shot.
Oh, and you made the follicle grow. Well, that's great.
Yeah.
So it shows there's some function there, and that puts you into at least a better category. Versus, like I said, someone who hasn't had a period in 3 years with an FSH level that's like, say, 100. Those are much harder cases and really are pretty dismal. So to your question of kind of like IVF, I think the question is, IVF is always the best. And I'd love to hear Dr. Salem's view on this too. There's no question it's the best, but it doesn't always mean what you need. And I talk about this a lot of times, like my example, not the greatest example in the world, but I talk about skateboards and cars. And I say that, like, if you want to go 10 miles, you probably don't want to use your skateboard. You probably want to get in the car and get there. It's going to be very fast. And the car's better than the skateboard. But if you only want to go 50 feet, it's probably going to take you longer to go in the car than it would just be to jump on the skateboard. And so that's kind of how I see IVF and things like IUIs. And the question is, do you need to do IVF? And the answer is no. Then, there's really not going to be as much of a benefit in some ways, and it can be almost cost prohibitive, right? So if you can only do, let's say, 1 or 2 IVFs, and you can only make 1 egg each time, you're getting 2 eggs. But if you could do something like IVC or IUI, where you could do multiple cycles, you'll get multiple eggs. And so it's a tough conundrum to be in, because one's better, but if you can only do it once, you get 1 egg. That's a lot to go on 1 egg. And at your age, you were in the best age group possible to have things work, because statistically speaking, your eggs should still be good, even though your ovarian reserve is very low. And so anyways, I'd love to hear what Dr. Salem says, and we can, kind of see what we can come up with here.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that, so I have to say, I feel like I've seen a wide amount of variation among people who have this kind of perimenopausal picture. And by the way, I mean, this is like a little, like, just definition stuff and semantics, but like, if you're still having period, just like Dr. Amos is saying, like, very technically, you actually haven't entered that menopausal window yet. You're not technically like already at POI. And I think this term gets thrown around a lot. And I think what people mean is you're in the peri-POI window, where your FSH is going up, the amount of ovarian reserve you really have is dwindling quickly, and there's something going on that's kind of like, hey, flashing red light, but it's not a solid red light. You can still go if you stop and turn left, right? So the flashing red light. And so I think that distinction is really important, because, if you are completely in menopause, no periods, FSH is very high, and it's been a year, then yes, really it's going to be virtually impossible for us to do anything. And the research shows that, pretty clearly. But if you're having periods and you're ovulating an egg, even if it's very inconsistent, sometimes we can help with the different types of priming protocols, different kinds of things. So I'm a little biased here, because I've seen a lot of success with these types of patients. And my bias is, why not try with the most efficient thing first, see how that goes, at least 1 cycle. And if it goes really, really well, I've had POI patients or peri-POI patients where you take them through their first cycle, you're like, God, this is not going well. They get 1 follicle growing. And then it's like, oh, I keep talking to them. I'm like, I just want you to know this isn't great. It's just 1 follicle. We get the 1 follicle, it's a mature egg, and it fertilizes. We watch it. 3 days, it's still growing. 5 days, it's still growing. Oh my gosh, we have a blastocyst. We transfer the blastocyst, leads to a baby, and we can't believe it. Like, this is unbelievable. But the reality is, that patient was 34. She has great egg quality. And even though you're walking a tight rope with that 1 egg, the quality is such that everything is kind of working out nicely. So just because you're necessarily don't have very many eggs doesn't mean the egg quality is very poor. So I do think a lot of times my bias is to tell people, let's try the most efficient thing first. If you can stomach it, if you have the emotional, physical, financial bandwidth to do that. It's very rare in medicine that we start with the kind of the treatment that's less good, then go to the really good one. We usually just say, let's try the most efficient thing first. Now, I totally agree with Dr. Amos. I'd still take a skateboard, even though he's a much better skater than I am, for 40 feet or 50 feet than a car. But that's kind of my bias. Is that what do you think of that logic, Rachel? I'm just curious. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, no, this has been very helpful. I've been contemplating between IVF or, the other option that my doctors told me is just an egg donor. So I'm really not ready to accept an egg donor yet. So the IUI versus the IVF, is kind of where I stand, just to even give myself a chance, just because that emotional part has been really conflicting for me. So.
Well, I would tell you, definitely don't jump to an egg donor, because if you were 42 in this situation, egg donor probably makes sense. As Dr. Salem pointed out, I mean, you're in that age group where there are normal eggs there. And so, you can always I always tell people, you can always use a donor. It doesn't matter if you do it now or 2 years from now, the chances are going to be about the same. So you don't have to jump to that. And it's really important for you to have that closure, at least know that things, will work or won't work. And I actually don't disagree with Dr. Salem. And I probably, in a short amount of time, didn't point this out. I agree 100%. If you are sitting on an opportunity, things will work, you do the best thing first. Mm-hmm. But I also look at it from the standpoint is not everyone can do the best thing first. And I would even make an argument that it's best to, if you get an embryo, don't even use it. Actually keep that embryo and now try to get pregnant with either IUIs or get pregnant whatever other way you can, and save that as a backup. Because as he mentioned, you can always go back to IUIs. But it's hard to, you want to do your best thing first when you have the best opportunity. And I would definitely try stuff. Make sure you're with, I'm not trying to say anything about your doctor. I don't know who they are, but make sure they're a clinic that's done patients like this. Because as Dr. Salem pointed out, I too have had patients who are basically considered, perimenopausal and have had multiple live births from patients. And the way you do that is you have to use different protocols. It's not the standard. If you're getting the standard thing, you're probably, you might get lucky, but there really are special protocols that have been made for this. I literally just did a podcast on this yesterday about different protocols. And it's unlike the way you would think it, where most people don't want to be oversuppressed. You actually want to be oversuppressed sometimes, depending on how severe your FSH levels are. There's ways to add other medications into it. So, like I said, just make sure that they've worked with patients like this, and it's kind of something they're good at. And always get a second opinion on this before you jump to donors. That's one thing I'll tell you. I mean, I hate to see you jump to it right away with just because someone says it. If you're producing an egg and you're able to do it with IUI, you sound like actually a really good candidate for doing something like IVF. You might get 2 or 3 eggs with that.
Rachel, I think there's one more point. I just want to keep you here for one more second, because you shared something with all the other listeners out there that I think is really important, which is this idea of like, hey, listen, I'm not ready to move to a donor egg. And I think that's so important, because I've had so many patients over the years, and I go back to them and I ask them whether or not they were successful with their own eggs or not after the fact. And I say, do you regret having tried with your own eggs? Not a single patient that I've ever spoken with has told me they regret trying, one round of IVF. I've had some extreme cases where some people have tried a lot of rounds of IVF, and I was really advising them to try, donor earlier. And a few of them have told me, I should have probably, been good after 2 or 3 rounds and tried donor at that point. But nobody's ever come back to me and says, I wish I wouldn't have tried that 1 round, because I think there's something very important there to know that, hey, in 2025, we did the most technologically advanced, most sophisticated thing. I gave myself every last chance to make it work. And if it worked, we're so grateful. And if it didn't, then we're okay moving on.
And one thing too, Rachel, I would bring up is you might be a decent candidate for things like, PRP therapy in the ovary. I mean, because, you're on that brink where if things are going poorly, it might just rev things up enough. And so a lot of times people wait till it's too late. They wait till they're in menopause and then do it. That's another option. So like I said, definitely go out there, look at things. I think Dr. Salem gave some great advice there. So
cool. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you so much. Yeah, that's one thing you and I just 100% agree about, which is, people should not just jump straight to donors. And it's right for some people. It is right, and if they're ready, but they have to be ready. That's the most important part. And that's one thing you and I are 100% aligned on. Looks like we have a couple other people here, so we'll kind of bring on some other people. Sounds like Melissa we got here. Hi, Melissa. How you doing?
Good. How are you?
Fantastic. What do you got for Dr. Salem? Any questions for us?
I do. So, first, Dr. Amos, you know me very well. So
I
you know
do.
my history. So 9 egg retrievals now.
Wow.
And in those 9, we've had 4 embryos, and they've all been tested abnormal. And I'm just kind of wondering, like, at what point do I just say, like, everything is just going to be abnormal?
Yeah, this has actually been looked at. And so the prior abnormal embryos do not suggest that they're all going to be abnormal. That's what the data shows. However, when you look at ages, and so most people don't know, you're not at the age group where I'd say you should always expect it. But to give you an idea, I mean, I recently had someone who was 47, almost 48, who had a normal embryo with PGT, 45, 44. And even though most of the embryos have come back abnormal, many times in the very first cycle comes back. It's a statistical game. There's no question about it. And I always look at women like yourself and look at how much strength you have to keep doing this, because a lot of people wouldn't even get this far. I'm sorry to hear that there hasn't got normal, and I know with us we weren't able to get any normal ones, and so I'm sad to know that you haven't with anyone else. But there's no fear that there aren't normal embryos there. There always is. As a matter of fact, they know that even when you're in menopause, there's still eggs there. I had a patient the other day who said to me, "Wait, I still have eggs when I'm in menopause?" I go, "Oh yeah, there's still eggs there." Now, the percentage of those eggs that are normal are lower, and the ability to get them out of your body is harder, but they're still there. And so, they're definitely there. Dr. Salem, what would you have to say? Just to give you an idea, definitely kind of severe diminished ovarian reserve type of patient with does pretty decent, in the stem wise, but the quality of the eggs are, definitely representative of the diminished ovarian reserve.
Yeah. I'm sorry, Melissa, you've gone through this. This is really hard. I mean, obviously you've put your best foot forward, and then a few more times. So there's some really interesting studies around this, and I'll also tell you kind of what my practical experience is. I mean, the studies that come out of places where people do a lot of IVF cycles, like Japan and Australia. So in places like Japan, people will do like 9, 10 IVF cycles. That's not like unusual at all. And they'll just do these mini stem IVF cycles. And in Australia, they have these huge databases about people doing a lot of IVF cycles as well. And the reassuring thing that you see there is that, there was a study publishing, demonstrating that even through 7 cycles of IVF, you have incremental benefits. So what does that mean? You could fail the first 6 cycles and you still get pregnant in the 7th cycle, which for a lot of people, that seems so counterintuitive, right? You're like, wait a second, I did the same thing 6 times. You're telling me on the 7th time, aren't you guys smart? Don't you guys know what you're doing? Why is it that? Why does it take you 7 times to figure it out? And I wish it were that easy, but like the reality is that it's just kind of luck. It's like dumb luck at a certain point, because if you have a small number of eggs and the egg quality is relatively low, and you're getting maybe not the highest fertilization rates, not the highest throughput rates, then it just, it takes that many iterations, if you will, of it to get to that euploid embryo. So now here's the practical part. We all have a limit, right? Like, and at a certain point, it's just like, gosh, how much treatment am I going to go through? How much, how many visits with Dr. Amos am I going to have to see him? Because he sees his patients every single ultrasound for IVF. So I know you're seeing him a lot. So, what I'm getting at is there's this practical element too. And that's where the medicine and the science meet. And, we all have a life, and sometimes we just have to say, okay, I've been through X number of cycles and I'm going to do one more closure cycle. But the data doesn't suggest that, you would never get a euploid embryo either, but there's a practical part to it.
Okay. Yeah, that's kind of like where I'm at right now. I feel like I like might have like one more and just let's make it an even 10. But I guess I just was kind of curious, if it was even worth it. I am kind of doing like a low stim, so I'm not getting that many eggs like I was when I was with Dr. Amos. But what was really interesting about this last round was the quality of this embryo. It was actually graded very good. And so it was like shocking that it came back abnormal. And so I guess that was just really interesting to me. And the only other question that I really had regarding this was there isn't anything that me or my husband can do to make those chromosomal abnormalities not happen, right? Like there's no supplements or lifestyle changes that we can do to like help prevent this, right? Especially when the quality of the egg was actually good and it made it.
Yeah, there's different what are called like mitotic disorders and meiotic disorders, when it comes to chromosomes. And the ones you're born with are the meiotic ones. Those are the ones that when you're in your mother's womb. And those are really what most of these are. Mitotic disorders, which are where the cells are, let's say everything is dividing later, there is some evidence that with mitochondria quality and stuff that might affect that a little bit, but that's not most of these issues. And so I always tell patients there's nothing you can do, and I think Dr. Salem said best. There is a point where you get age-wise and the number of eggs you're making where it's no longer about doing something right, being at the right clinic. It is just chance. It really is just a numbers game at that point. Because the thing I've told you before, I said to you that it's not a question of if. I can guarantee you, if you can keep going and you can keep going, you will get there. The problem is who can keep doing that? I mean, I'm impressed already. And just so listeners who are listening know, I mean, I even recommended for you to try somewhere else. I said, listen, I've done everything I can and we just haven't had the luck. I said, it's worth trying something else. Just maybe someone else just has dumb luck and we'll get it, right one time. And as I told you, I said, yes, if you go and do less meds, you're going to get less eggs. The quality part, what's interesting is the morphology doesn't represent the DNA. There is some association, but it's definitely not a direct causation. So that's the reason why you can have a beautiful AA embryo and it can be your worst embryo. And that's really what PGT did. It helped people understand that the best embryos aren't always the ones that are going to get people pregnant. So, but I am so sorry, Melissa. I do pray for you, and as I do everyone, I'm sorry that it hasn't worked yet.
No, it's okay. I mean, I miss you.
I miss you too.
I always talk very highly about you and the New Direction team, and it's definitely hard to do this journey without you, but I'm stubborn and I just don't want to give up. I'm not ready to lose that dream. And I think I guess like, is there a risk other than my mental health? Is there a risk of me continuing? Like, is there a danger?
I don't think there's a danger. I'd love to hear what Dr. Salem says about this, but we also don't have a lot of data on people who do 10 cycles, right? So we have a lot of data on people who do 6 cycles, but 10 is on the higher side. Dr. Salem mentioned about in Japan and some of these other countries where they do lots of multiple cycles, and that's kind of what you are. And I would assume the data says no, but Dr. Salem might be better to answer that one.
Yeah, no, this is a topic I've had the good fortune of being able to geek out on a little bit. I write the article for Up to Date, which is a reference for other physicians on the safety of IVF and how many cycles and all this kind of stuff. And so, and I just wrote the update on it. And basically, here's the take home message. 15 pages later, it's safe. Basically, do your regular screening. Make sure you're getting a mammogram. Make sure you're getting your regular screening. The incremental risk of each retrieval is very, very, very small. We're talking about a procedure that big picture is about as safe or safer than a colonoscopy in terms of, the risk of a serious complication in expert hands. So the only, major sort of medical thing is exactly what you mentioned, which is mental health stuff, Melissa. As long as you feel like you're doing well there and you have a good support team around you and your clinic's taking care of you and that kind of thing, I think
Okay.
most people are totally fine.
And Dr. Amos, I listened to your podcast, and I just want to make sure I understand this properly. There's no chance, like if a embryo is tested, PGT tested, and it comes back, missing chromosome 21 or whatever. It's not if you were to implant it, like there's no changing that, right? Like it can't change once it implants, like that missing chromosome will never grow. I guess I don't know if that sounds stupid.
I think I hear the question you're asking. So from the standpoint, if the embryo truly is missing chromosome 21, then yes, there is no repair mechanism to fix that. But the question that maybe the underlying question is it possible that, like, let's say the test was wrong, right? And that it already repaired it. Let's say like that was a cell that came out and that was abnormal and it's not representing the embryo, then yes, the embryo can still be there. And so when I mentioned that study earlier about like 200 patients where they went and just, put back embryos and no one had a live birth from an abnormal embryo, that's still a very small number in the big picture. And, I mean, there's no doubt in my mind that if you put back enough embryos, let's say 100,000 embryos, there probably is going to be someone who has a live birth with an embryo that was called completely abnormal. I don't think anyone's going to question that because there's no test that's perfect. But from the standpoint of correcting a whole chromosomal problem, I think not until we have like CRISPR, which can actually go and change the DNA, will that be, and even that wouldn't even do because that's missing a chromosome. You have to have an extra one to remove the whole chromosome. So, but they're saying, do you have anything to answer onto that too? Same. You're muted. I don't think you know that.
I'm not that loud. I mean, I'm pretty loud, but not loud enough to overcome that. But like, yeah, no, I agree with you. I mean, I don't think I have anything meaningful to add beyond that. I agree.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you guys. You guys are awesome. I miss you.
Good luck over there, Melissa. Wishing you all the best.
Thank you.
Miss you too.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye. Well, I know we got probably time for one more. We have one more person here come on. So I think we'll end it with Kenna.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can.
Awesome. Okay. I see Dr. Johnson. I absolutely love the clinic. You guys are just amazing at everything that you guys do.
Thank you.
So I'm 27 and my husband and I have been trying for 3 years to get pregnant. We did 2 IUIs. They both failed. So we decided to move forward and do IVF. And we have unexplained infertility. So we don't know exactly what's going on, but we just did embryo transfer a couple weeks ago and it failed. And now I'm just kind of having like confidence issues because I'm feeling like, okay, is the next embryo transfer going to work? We're so grateful and so blessed because we have 9 healthy embryos left. And we are just so incredibly grateful for that. And we're counting our blessings. But it's also so hard because we're both just like, how do we stay confident and, like just trust the process? Like we're just both just, I don't know, me and my husband are both struggling over here. We're just like, well, how do we just move forward and just, trust and, because I'm like, we love you guys so much. Like seriously, Dr. Johnson has been so sweet and so amazing. And the clinic is amazing. Like we have nothing bad to say. We just love you guys so much. But this process has been so hard. Anyway, and I also wasn't expecting our transfer to fail because transfer went great and everything just worked out so perfectly. So I honestly wasn't expecting it to not work. And so anyway, I just was like coming on here just to see like how I can have more confidence, things like that.
And is it okay to assume that it sounds like you did testing on the embryos too? Is that correct?
We did. Yes,
yeah.
We did.
Okay. And the embryo you put back was the best embryo, or was it chosen because of gender or anything like that?
We chose a girl, but because I wanted to have a girl, but obviously like now we're like, okay, next time we're going to choose the best embryo. Because we want, we obviously want to be pregnant. So anyway.
And you didn't make a poor choice by that. I don't want you to
Okay.
feel like that was the reason. I just wanted to understand the situation a little bit more. Dr. Salem, what do you have to say to her to help her encouragement? I mean, obviously, I think there's a lot we can tell her.
Oh my gosh. First of all, I mean, I can just tell you're a super courageous, confident person. I mean, you're coming on the show. You got, two big, bad, mean wolves out here. No, I'm kidding. Hopefully we're not. Hopefully we're pretty easy on here. But, this is a hard process. Like that's the first thing I want to say. And I think that anybody who says they're not kind of a little shaken when they go through an embryo transfer and it doesn't work, and they've gone through all this kind of stuff, maybe isn't letting on to the whole truth. And I think if you polled 100 couples, men or women, that they'll probably almost all tell you, hey, I feel a little shaken from this. It's the other side of all of that is we as doctors know how these things go. And when you have that many embryos that are normal and, your age and everything like that, I can tell you with a very, very, very high degree of confidence that this will eventually work for you. And if it wasn't the last embryo, it's most likely the next embryo. And if it's not that one, it's almost certainly the one after that. Obviously, we can't just be, haphazard about it and just say, oh, whatever, just always keep just trying and not think about it. Dr. Johnson's an extremely thoughtful doctor, and I know he's going to put every piece of data into making sure that he looks at why it may have not worked. So was it that you got a biochemical pregnancy? Did it not implant? Is there something we could look at further about your endometrial lining? Was there some other parameter that could be optimized? And if nothing comes up, sometimes we say, hey, this looks like it was just maybe unlucky. We're going to just try again, because we know that even the very best embryos at minimum don't implant 30% of the time, right? 30% of people with perfect embryos don't get it to work. That's 3 out of every 10 people. Everything is perfect. It still doesn't work. But the next time around, you get that really high chance of it working again, 60 to 70% of, implanting leading to a pregnancy. So that's my perspective on it. But I do know that that can feel really hard when you're in the moment. But how do you, talk about this, doctor? I'm just, curious.
Yeah, I think you should feel very confident, as Dr. Salem said. I mean, statistically speaking, the fact that you have 9 embryos, there's almost zero chance you're not coming away successful, other than if you just stop. And that's the one thing we talk about is, this idea of being able to keep going, because it is hard. And I think, they acknowledge that. I mean, IVF is the best thing we have. You even went a step further. You tested the embryos. So when it doesn't work, there's this feeling of severe hopelessness, like, well, wow, that didn't work. And all these 3 years are not working. You really start to feel like it's never going to work. But that's definitely not true. As he said, even in our clinic, we have pretty good implantation rates. Still, about 1 in 4 don't implant at all when you put back 1 embryo. That's a pretty big number. We don't like to think of it as a big number, but I mean, if you knew, like, let's say driving to your appointment had a 25% chance of dying, you'd be like, okay, we're doing telemedicine today. I'm not going to go to that appointment because that's too high of a risk. So it really is it's a good chance, but it's still not as high as we like to think of it. It's not 100%, right? By the time you do that second transfer, now only about 1 out of 7 people will not be pregnant. And even with the third one, it's close to about like 1 out of 10. Now, the question that Dr. Salem was saying is that you can look at the data and make some adjustments, but usually in the first one, because it's such a high chance of not coming away successful, about 40% of people don't have a live birth. As Dr. Salem said, 25 to 30% don't have implantation. So when that doesn't happen, it's hard to jump to all these tests that are very rarely the problem. So for example, like timing issues only affect about 10 to 15% of people. And even the people who have timing issues doesn't mean that fixing it's going to fix anything, because it wasn't that big of a deal, even though there might have been off a little bit. So what a lot of people do is they just do the other transfer. And we have the benefit of seeing thousands of these. And so we know that on that second transfer, it works. And we get all the credit that we did something better. But in reality, we just did another transfer. For For patients, the scary part is, what if there's something else wrong? And it's not an unfair thing to ask. The problem is it worth really doing all the testing now when in reality it could have just been chance? And so what most people do is they wait till that second failed transfer, which sucks to have to go through. But after that, if that happens, that's really when people start going, okay, now we need to start looking at things even a little bit more in depth. And I have no doubt, as Dr. Salem said, Dr. Johnson has absolutely looked at everything. He goes back, looks at his notes from the transfers, looks at everything, goes, is there anything else we could do different right now? But in reality, if you do nothing different, just doing a second transfer, most people will come away successful. I have no doubt you're going to have success on your second transfer. The only thing I do a little bit different is if I ever have a failed transfer in the first one, I do draw the blood on day 5 and 7 a little bit earlier, just so I can figure out, is it implanting or not? That really helps me make some more decisions. That doesn't mean people need to do it. It's not wrong not to do it. It's just something I do.
Okay. No, you guys are helping me so much because I'm like, okay, I have like no confidence. I'm like, I feel like I've just been like, oh, obviously we're going to try it again and we'll keep trying. We won't stop, but it's just been a hard couple of weeks. So anyway, but I appreciate you both. You guys are so sweet. And thank you so much for answering all my questions and for the encouragement.
You're going to do great.
You're going to do absolutely well. If you see us in the hallway, tell us, say, you guys are right. I got it right on that next one. So.
Oh, I totally will.
and please come on to the show once you are pregnant. That might be really soon. So come on to the show.
That will help people see that it does work. Because the problem is they don't get to see that. So
yeah, no, for sure. Oh my gosh, you guys are so sweet. Well, I'm excited. I know it will happen. I do. It's just a matter of time, trusting the whole process.
Absolutely. Well, you have a great night.
You too. Thank you.
Well, Dr. Salem, anything you have to end off on this topic? I'll give my first, and I think you should end it. I think PGT is a great thing to do. I think, honestly, even young people, I think if it's free, I would say to do it, because I do believe there is some benefit, to at least know, like she now knows that it didn't not work because the embryo was abnormal, right? So it already gives her the confidence, okay, there could be something else, or it could just be chance. Whereas if she didn't do that, she would be thinking, well, if all my embryos are abnormal, type of thing. And then the confidence people can feel is that you can still transfer those embryos. There are people that do it. But, in the end, I think people don't have to be worried about throwing away abnormal embryos. I think the data really shows that it would be very, very rare if that ever happens. And again, if you're worried about it, you could theoretically transfer them. And like I said, although we don't, there are clinics out there who do. And so I'd love to see, like I said, how you want to send us off on this. Any pearls of wisdom that you want to give off on this last minute?
No, I think, you put it great. And the big thing that I always think about is, net harms to benefit. So meaning, like, how beneficial is this incredible technology to how much potential harm could it do? And I think it really favors the direction of doing the testing for the vast, vast majority of people. Maybe not every single person, but the vast majority of people are going to get a tremendous amount of benefit. And I think one of the things that, I'm just extremely proud of kind of what we have been able to do at our clinic, and what, some others have tried to do, is just making this more accessible. And I think this is a technology that, 15, 20 years ago, if you would have talked about how many people could access this unbelievably powerful technology, I think we would have all been shocked that we could have made it this accessible. And it's something that I think is very worth, thinking about. I think we would never say there is no risk, that it's 0%, that it's never, ever gonna, lead to something, but the overall benefit, I think, in many, many cases favors doing PGT. And I think I'll just leave it with that.
Well, thanks for being up again. I look forward to talking again here in a couple of weeks here, and we'll do our next show. But have a good night, okay?
Have a good night, everybody.